Welcome to Bullshift, the podcast. My name is John DeGuy. I am the author of the book Bullshift and the host of the podcast. This is a podcast that talks about behavioral finance in general and focuses in particular on how the financial services industry shifts your attention to make you feel more bullish. My guest this week is Maureen Jensen. Maureen is the former chair and CEO of the Ontario Securities Commission, that's the OSC, and the current chair of the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, that's OBSI. And she is also the co-author, along with Don Hathaway, of the book Corporate Governance DNA.
I want to show you my book.
Let's do that. Let's see if we can put the book up there right away. And that's where I want to start. I'm wondering, Maureen, if you could tell me why you and Don wrote Corporate Governance DNA, what it is you think people need to understand about governance, why you think it's important, and what you can tell us about best practices in decision making.
Okay, well, that's a lot to go through. So the reason Don and I decided to write this book was there are so many books out there on corporate governance. A lot of them are about personal experiences in corporate governance, but the other books are written by incredibly smart and often academic or legal scholars. And they talk about the background of corporate governance and what the rules and regulations are of corporate governance. But this book is a primer for directors who are currently directors, but also ones who want to be directors. And what we believe is the rules and regulations are what they are, but the essence of good corporate governance is acting ethically and ensuring that shareholders and people within the company have trust and confidence in the board to oversee what's going on in the corporation. And so this book is very much about how to. So there's the agenda for corporate directors is much broader than it used to be. And the reason for that is when we ended up having Enron happen and Bre-X, a lot of people stepped back and said, hey, these great boards of celebrity board members, how come this happened? And it's because the boards themselves didn't look more deeply into what was going on. So this book talks about that. It talks about how to show up at the table, how to prepare, how to ask sometimes very unpopular questions, and how to press to get answers for those questions. It also talks about the scope of the board agenda and how big it's grown, about cybersecurity, IA. We barely touch IA in the book. That has been, this book was written over the past 2 years, but IA has exploded now. ESG, corporate culture.
IA, you mean AI, right? You mean artificial intelligence.
Yes, AI, sorry. I'm a lefty. Everything's backwards for me. And then there's a whole section in the book on how you can actually prepare yourself for any board interviews and how to think about what boards you want to join. And my perspective is you only want to join boards where you love their strategy, you love their product, and you want to work with those people. Otherwise, why would you put yourself there?
Right. Great. Well, it's interesting because, you've had some regulatory positions and sat on some boards. I've sat on a couple of boards in my career as well. So it is the sort of thing where I can certainly agree that you do sometimes have to ask tough questions and you really ought to love what you're doing. Otherwise, what are you doing?
That's right.
There are so many questions that I would love to ask you about your past life at the Ontario Securities Commission, but I'm going to skate right over that and go straight to OBSI because we only have so much time. And I think it would be good if you could maybe just take one quick moment to explain to listeners what the mandate of OBSI is. So when I say that you're the chair, hopefully people can understand what your mandate is for the board.
Okay. Yeah, OBSI or OBSI is the Ombudsman for both banking, which is the B, and securities investments, which is the SI. And so what they do is they act as an arbiter between clients who bring their complaints about the service or the outcomes that they had either as a banking client or a securities client. And so what OBSI does is it receives those complaints, it investigates those complaints in with the full knowledge of the client and the full knowledge of the firm, whether it's a bank or a securities a business. And then what they do is they come up with what they think the outcome of that is. And about 2/3 of the time, the outcome is there really wasn't a problem here. And about 1/3 of the time, it's the problem is, yes, you have had some losses. There's a reason why you had those losses, and they come up with a number. Right. And so that what happens there is it takes it away from, after so many days of being either at the security firm or at the bank, the client can escalate the complaint if they're not getting any traction. Okay. And so that's what it is. So all banks at this time, that just changed. All banks and all securities investment firms must be members of OBSI, and their clients have the option to go to OBSI when things go wrong.
So that then brings us to the very contemporary early 2024 political firestorm that you find yourself in right now. I'm going to hold up a copy of the March-April issue of Investment Executive. And what it says is that the CSA's, which is the Canadian Securities Administrators' proposal to empower the OBSI to have bounding dispute resolution authority is a bitter pill for the industry and has been met with a wave of criticism. So we're at the point right now where, up until now, what you've described, a lot of what has been done to try to gain compliance when individuals have a dispute with a firm or an advisor, a lot of it is just resolved by naming and shaming, and there's no real way of getting people to actually collect, even if there is a judgment made that the money is owing. So it's not enforceable. So what we're talking about now is we've got an industry, and I think there were 6 different major stakeholders, FAIR and whatnot, that were all speaking out in favor of binding dispute resolution, disgorgement, and payments. Could you maybe walk us through the 2 arguments of the 2 sides so that people can understand what's being debated right now?
Sure. So let's just step back for a moment and say that OBSI is not the only place you can go to help settle a complaint. You can take your complaint to CIRO, which is the regulator of the securities industry, or to FCAC, but they would just turn it back to, because they don't take complaints, to OBSI. The other place you can go is court. And that is an expensive, long drawn out issue, and the courts are not experts in these. And so generally these kinds of cases have to be much bigger. So on the one hand, consumers have been wanting this binding solution for a very long time. If a client is actually at OBSI and it's deemed that they have a good case and they've lost some money, currently the industry has the ability not to pay. And so there, OBSI can only name and shame. They publish their name and they say they won't pay this amount of money, and that's it. There is also another issue, and that is industry. Sometimes when a case comes forward and OBSI says, well, you should be reimbursed X number of dollars because there were failures in the following areas. Quite often, then the firm goes back to the client and tries to offer them a lowball settlement instead of the amount that OBSI was suggesting. So either way, clients lose at that point. So I'd say everyone on the consumer protection side is absolutely wants binding. On the industry side, they say one of the major arguments is that there shouldn't be an arbiter with a binding authority at all. If binding comes in, it should go through a court. And so that's one thing that they're saying, which then is extremely expensive for the clients. And if we step back from that and just think about it for a second, most clients get less than $20,000 in these settlements. So for $20,000, you can't even hire your lawyer and get the brief written up. So a lot of people would just walk away from the situation at that point. Industry is very worried about the fact that binding could make these settlements much more expensive for them. They're worried that it's completely unfair and unconstitutional, that this doesn't go to a court of law. And what they're saying is that it will embolden more clients to complain. And so the facts really don't show that. OBSI returns maybe $1.5 million to clients each year. Mm-hmm. And we're talking hundreds of different firms. So very small amounts of money.
Right. It's almost as though, and I don't know what the numbers are for small claims court these days, but I think small claims court is at least $25,000 and maybe more like $50,000. And obviously you're still hiring a lawyer, but it would seem to me that maybe small claims would be a better way for people who have been wronged insofar as, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000. Even if you can get $25,000 back, that's likely more than you would get if you were to try a non-binding OBSI sort of approach. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's also, I think, the data shows that almost everyone complies. There's never been a banking case that has not been paid, ever. There's no name and shame. And there's only been 12 name and shames. So it's really when the numbers get bigger, people are much more focused on not paying.
There was a program on CBC's Marketplace recently in March where the reporters got a chance to go into various bank branches and with a hidden camera were sort of mystery shoppers and asked a number of questions of the representatives of the banks, and were given some conspicuously wrong information. And consumer advocates say this is smoking gun evidence of the industry being systemically broken, and that what you see, even what goes to OBSI, is the tip of the iceberg, and that a lot of people are being sold or missold or upsold or what have you in a way that they oftentimes would be oblivious to because they don't know any better. Do you have any comments? I don't know. I presume you've seen the Marketplace expose. Do you have any comments on it?
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all that this is what they found. Generally, the shelf at any bank or at any securities firm for a small client walking in is very, very narrow. And they're sold. They maybe have 3 or 4 funds available. They're generally funds that are their own funds. It's not very, the issue with understanding what the management costs are for those funds, so the embedded fee in the funds. And then it's not also very clear for them to know what the fee is for the investment advisor. So I would say that this happens in banking. It happens in the securities business. It certainly happens in the insurance business. And every one of those have different regulators and different rules. That is the issue. People have no idea generally what they're buying.
Is there a situation where if you were forward looking and you could find a way to navigate the fact that there are banking representatives and securities and mutual fund representatives and insurance representatives, and they're all governed by different regulations and different regulators, if there was a way you could harmonize things, what sorts of principles, instead of making it an actual rule, what principles do you think would be best as a means of protecting individual investors?
Well, the CSA and the OSC, when I was there, we put in place a rule that was the best interest rule. And the rule is, do what's in the best interest of your client, not yourself, not your firm, but your client. But that behavioral economics has shown in all of their studies that you put a dollar bill on the table or you put a screen up with dollar signs all over it, people just they glaze out. They don't understand it. And I have to say that some advisors use a lot of jargon.
Right.
And so between not understanding how the market works, not really understanding how a fund works, not being given the details on how much they're paying, and the fact that they're sitting there very uncomfortably knowing significantly less than the advisor, they often just say yes.
Right.
So that is the issue.
If you think of the Freakonomics books written by Levitt and Dubner 12 or 13 years ago, the first book came out, it caused quite a stir, and the publisher went back to them and said, okay, well, we want a second book, and which ended up becoming Super Freakonomics. And they asked the authors to come up with a unifying theme. And Levitt, particularly as the behavioral academic on the writing team, couldn't come up with anything. And finally, what they realized was the unifying theme was people respond to incentives. And what I think I'm hearing you say is, as long as there's a dollar at the end of the rainbow incentivizing you to do one or the other, that's called self-serving bias. And it's only natural, it's just human nature for people to do that. And of course, there's also a guy by the name of Joseph Stiglitz that says there's an asymmetry of information. And whenever you've got two or more people negotiating something, the person who knows more about the subject is going to win the negotiation. And
absolutely,
that is obviously the person who's the expert in the finance industry.
And let's just be absolutely clear that the client knows nothing about the internal incentives at any firm. And we know that in the money business, the incentive is money. If you make more on fees by selling a certain product, you will always put that product first.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of the findings, this is, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a professor by the name of Sunita Saw over at Harvard who did some research a number of years ago. I was once at a firm that had a proprietary product shelf. And what they would do is they would say, these are proprietary products. And just so you know, the cost is a bit higher, but you know it leads to a higher margin for us and it's better for us. So we're going to make this disclosure. And what regulators said was that by making the disclosure, the firms could wash their hands of any kind of questionable, whether the behavior was ethical or not. What Saw's research showed was that it's perverse. By making the disclosure, the client, who is otherwise not very clear on the industry, would say, oh, you mean I can help you out by buying your in-house product that pays you more? Oh, well, since I'm indifferent between A and B, and you say I should buy the in-house A, let me sign up for in-house A. And in the end, the disclosure, which was supposed to be acting as a prophylactic against buying too much of the internal stuff, ended up being an accelerant.
That's right. And they think, wow, you're such a nice guy. You're actually telling me that this is going to be more expensive. But the big issue there is they're saying it's going to perform better. That's why you should buy this. And it doesn't.
Right.
The data shows that active management does not perform better.
Yeah, there's no guarantee of anyone who's starting to make recommendations based on past performance being repeatable is obviously talking out of both sides of the mouth, because the evidence is very clear that's not the case. I wanted to talk to you about the bias of embedded compensation, which is a bit of a battle from yesteryear, because we're not talking about it right now, but we were talking offline a couple of days ago, and there was some research that was done. Other jurisdictions have eliminated embedded compensation, which in Canada, for the people listening, are called trailing commissions. Some people will call them trailer fees, as if calling a commission a fee somehow makes it professional. It's a commission. Sales representatives earn commissions. Calling them fees don't change them. They're still commissions. At any rate, in Canada, trailers, let's just leave that sort of political question aside for a moment. Trailers are paid to representatives. And in other jurisdictions, when trailers are eliminated, what happens is that now the people giving the advice, the people who recommend products, are free to make products based on recommendations based on what I call product meritocracy. They're making the product recommendations based on what's best for the client, as opposed to what pays a higher embedded compensation. That hasn't happened in Canada. And again, the industry has argued violently against it, even though most other jurisdictions have made this change by eliminating embedded compensation. Could you maybe offer your
Well, the
thoughts
only
on
place,
that battle from yesteryear and what it might
yeah.
portend for the future?
Well, first of all, a lot of changes take time when there are so many regulators involved. Let's just start there. And
Right.
Canada is a very conservative country. And I'm not talking politics now. It's just a conservative country, and change goes slow. But what I will say is that trailing fees in online accounts, client online accounts, I mean, that was unbelievable when it was determined through research that not only would people be able to go in on an online forum at a bank or a securities firm and buy some stock themselves, but the trailing commission was still on it and they were
Right.
paying it for years. That is now gone.
Right.
However, if the trailing commission is still there, if you're buying through an IA.
It's amazing because a lot of these firms that would allow you to buy these funds with a trailing commission would hold out as being discount brokerages. That's what they were referred to.
That's
as
what they said, yeah.
What's one thing you might reasonably expect when dealing with a discount brokerage? I don't know, call me crazy, but I would have expected to get a discount. But there were no discounts. It was the same product that you could buy and sell at the same cost. Basically what you're saying is if you buy it with an advisor, you at least get some advice. It might be biased advice, it might be poor advice, but at least you're getting advice. With the discount brokerage, you're paying the exact same thing and getting no advice whatsoever. They tell you when you sign up, we're not going to give you any advice here. It's very clear. That's
right. This is a non-advice platform, but there's advisory fees embedded in it. But we didn't tell you that.
Yeah, it's astonishing how perverse the industry in general, and I would say the Canadian industry in particular, has been. And perverse is maybe being too kind, almost dysfunctional to the point of self-serving bias and the industry doing what helps the industry. And they do it because of what you call conservatism or the slow to change status quo nature of the industry. And it's
we pay in Canada, we pay some of the highest fees that in the world.
Right.
And it's quite shocking how high the fees are, but we also have a much smaller industry with a lot less competition. And so I think that's part of it as well. And for some reason, Canadians don't fight back.
Mm-hmm. Much to my chagrin.
And to mine. We have tried so many different ways to address some of the issues that we've been talking about. And the change is just very slow, and it's always, vociferously fought against. Just like we're talking about now, binding authority for a very small amount of money.
Pull another book off the shelf. The book before Bullshift I wrote was called Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry. And ironically, Stand Up probably had about 40 or 45 questions that people were given, specific questions in the book. These are the questions to ask. And there were three main problems I identified. Number one, as you correctly pointed out, Canadians are polite. They don't know what to ask. And so they don't even have the courage to ask because they don't want to look stupid. And second, just tell them, come on, you can do this, get in there, you can ask the questions. And then number two, I wouldn't know what questions to ask. Okay, here are the specific questions. And then you get to number three. But even if I ask the right questions, I summoned up the courage, I asked the right questions, I wouldn't be able to determine whether the answers I was given were legitimate or if someone was just trying to bullshit me. And so in Stand Up, I actually said, so here are the sorts of answers you should be looking for. So you could actually say, this is what you have to be mindful of. And it's been very frustrating because Canadians say they're unhappy, and the people will complain to OBSI and to you if they feel they've been wronged. But you'd think they would be agitating for change long before they had a dispute to begin with, because the system itself seems to be preordained to be against them.
I think it's pretty insular. Part of the problem, I think, is in education. We've never had in our educational system a very basic, economic information. And they used to a long time ago. there would be home ec for girls, you remember, and there would be shop for boys. And part of that was understanding what things cost and how to ask questions about that. That has been eliminated. And unfortunately, no one really understands how it works and how insular the business is. It has its own lingo. And part of it's, you're much more successful if your clients don't take up too much of your time and you can just spend more and more time getting more clients.
I have a guest to my podcast a few weeks ago. The podcast that I posted on March 21st is a guy named Chris Knudsen, and he is actually a financial literacy expert. And he says that there is actually now some information making its way into the school system. So that's really good. And then my guest the following week, we talked from the FCAC, from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, talking about what they're doing. So those people who have some role to educate the public are doing what they can in their small way. That's what you and I do. You know, we do what we can as we can. But alas, we're up against a monolithic industry that is fat and happy and quite happy to make money by making relatively modest and not entirely clear disclosures with regard to how things work. And as a result, most people aren't particularly aware of where the risks are.
And that's why I think OBSI is so important. It's just a completely neutral arbiter between clients and the firms they're dealing with. And I think that's why it's so important that it is binding, because they don't have a bias one way or another. They just look at the facts, and the facts tell them whether or not something was done correctly or not. That's it. It's a fairness standard.
There seems to be, as we now turn the corner into the second quarter of 2024, the first quarter of 2024 has seen a real mass exodus in some of the senior regulatory personalities in Canada. And I'm just going through the list here. Tyler Fleming of the Office of the Investor, Jeff Kehoe in enforcement at IROC, Deborah Foubert was in charge of client-focused reforms. They've all left in the past few months. Do you have any line of sight as to what's behind this mass exodus?
No, I honestly don't. I know that they have the executive branch has made a org chart change, but I don't know any of the reason behind it. But I have seen this exodus, and I would say to you that, Jeff Kehoe did some really good, interesting enforcement cases that focused on just incredibly bad behavior. And Deborah Foubert held the pen for Canada when it came to the best interest standard. And so, I would say that Tyler Fleming did an incredible job. He was part of the team that put together information for the school system to understand finances. And he's got an incredible website, or he and his team built an incredible website that helps people have conversations with their advisors. So I don't know what's going on. I think they're building for the future, but I just know who left. That's all. Right.
Okay. We were speaking a moment ago about the client-focused reforms, and I'm wondering if you can weigh in on that as well. With CIRO becoming the new regulator across the securities industry as of January of last year, we now have a new model, which is client-focused reforms, and specifically that talks more about for suitability, moving away from suitability in the traditional stocks, bonds, cash, and more toward risk tolerance and risk capacity. Do you think the changes that have been brought about by the client-focused reforms are a step in the right direction? Yes or no? And are they going far enough, or should they go further? What are your thoughts about CFR in general?
Well, it was CFR. I think it is definitely a step in the right direction. It's now a combination of not only do you have to give your clients what's suitable for them, but you have to actually do what's in their best interest. And so it's very hard when you have a generic set of words like that to prove what you've done. But more and more firms are now realizing that having to work in your client's best interest means much more than suitability. It means that the options have to be broader, and it means that your choice has to be suitable for your client, not just for your firm and not just for you. So, but I think it's going to take a while to get there.
Maureen, this is always where I like to end because we only have so much time. I always like to end with two things. And the first is called That's Bullshit. And that's if it was up to you, if you had a magic wand and you could do whatever you wanted to change the financial services industry, what would you change?
I would merge a whole bunch of regulators into one, and I would stop the fragmentation. Fragmentation causes slowness in change, and it means that you can negotiate yourself into years of not doing anything. And I find that the worst thing that we have for Canada. And I think that fragmentation should also be, you shouldn't have separate regulators for different kinds of products. It should be focused on the client. If clients buy things for their portfolio, they should all be regulated in the same way.
It's funny, the saying that I always like to use when we talk about regulatory reform in Canada is, when all is said and done, more will be said than done. And
this is true.
That's the story of my life. So the last question then is shift happens. If it was up to you and you were going to consolidate all the regulation so that you had one consistent regulator, as you said, as being the one thing that you would fix, how would you go about doing it? How would you bring about the change that you just spelled out for us a moment ago?
Well, I would probably go back to the last time that we tried to put at least all the securities regulators together. And I would say that it needs to be done for Canada, for all of us. And I think we also need to make sure that it's not just securities, but it should be also banking products and insurance. If we could do that, we could change things dramatically for Canadians.
Great. That's a beautiful, positive, uplifting, optimistic way to end. So I want to thank you so much, Maureen. It was a pleasure having you on. I want to wish you all the best in the important work you do, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. And don't forget, corporate governance DNA.
You got it.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager in Toronto and the author of the book Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. Bullshift is available online and in bookstores everywhere. The opinions expressed in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Bullshift, the podcast, is produced by TalkShoe, a division of IOTM.